We're going to be talking to you about the UF Data Sciences building that we had the pleasure to work on. And we'll get to introductions in a second. But before we do, these are the things that we are hopeful that you come out of this talk with. We're going to talk about, differences between data sciences labs and computer labs and computer research, because that's becoming more and more prominent these days compared to conventional wet research labs. We're going to talk about strategies that apply specifically to those types of data sciences labs, maybe not necessarily to wet research labs. And then we're also going to talk about some of the technology and the data that we used to deliver this project. And so the way that we're going to go through that is by doing some introductions and some background of the building, talking about UF, giving you some information about the building itself, and then talking about some of the aspects of the design, talking about some programmatic elements, showing you the results, and then we'll wrap it up and have a little bit of time for Q&A. So like Matt said, my name is Tyler Dykes. I'm a principal and science and technology, or member of our National Science and Technology Market Leader Group, and I've been with Affiliated for 18 years, and I came up as a mechanical engineer.
Hi, my name is Melody Wong. I'm also a mechanical engineer, currently as a project engineer with AEI. I've been with AEI for 11 years, and I specialize in sustainability design.
Thanks, Melody. So this is the building, and to give you a little context for UF's campus, they have a large campus, a lot of acreage, and this site specifically was about 230,000 square feet, and that we're going to talk about why that's important here in just a second. And in terms of projects that UF executes on an annual basis, they're in the range of 500 projects every year. And those range in size and scale. They're not all obviously the size of this building, but they have a lot of projects going on. And in 2023, the year when this project was finished up, they delivered just under 700 projects. 39 of those were major projects like you see here with our building. And so that was about $500 million worth of construction between 5 major projects. And so that gives you, it sort of sets the stage for what all was going on. And we'll get back to that in a little further down when we talk about some of the issues on the site. So specific to the building itself, you can see, the different types of programs that were envisioned to go into data science and information technology. What's unique about this building is that it's not home to a single specific college or a department or a research group in a department. It's actually 3 colleges: that's engineering, medicine, and pharmacy. And you can see all the programs here about midway down the page that were planned to go in here. And so that really opened up the door to doing a lot of interdisciplinary collaboration between these different groups. And that was part of the goal from the start for this building. So I mentioned the area of the site earlier. The gross area of the building you can see here is a little over 263,000 square feet. And so, that program size on this site led us to plan a 7-story building with the architects, just because of the constraints on the site. 7 stories is a little bit of a departure for UF's campus. They usually have 3-4 story tall buildings. So this was a little bit different in that aspect. Going on from there, this beginning to talk about, the need, occupants, and programs. So one of the goals from the start with this project was for collaboration, like I mentioned, but also to really show off what's going on inside of the building. And so, excuse me, we work with the architects to do that by, doing transparent walls on the inside, glazed openings on the outside, this collaborative spine that runs up the length and the height of the building. And that collaborative spine is also mirrored on the exterior of the building, which will show you in detail a little further on. And so for a little more context, it's the Malachowski Data Science and Information Technology building. And so the namesake is Chris Malachowski, who's one of the 2 co-founders of NVIDIA, and he's actually a UF graduate in electrical engineering. So Chris was involved along with the board of trustees all through the project. And so the existing programs that were planned to move into the building, they weren't recruiting new researchers entirely, but a lot of these folks are moving from other buildings around campus. And you can see the different spaces, the different colleges and programs. And so these programs existed in a number of different buildings around campus, and some of which were newer buildings and some of which were very old buildings. And so all these programs are highly computer lab focused. With the exception of the Florida Institute of Cybersecurity, they're all dry labs. They're all computer labs. So they're doing research, but it's not wet research labs. And so the distinction there to point out, as opposed to wet research like you see in these images on the left, with the overhead utilities, movable casework, sinks, floor drains, pipe services, all that sorts of things. You don't have any of that in a computer lab, in a data science research environment. You have spaces like we see on the right. And the other big distinction to make there is that we've got air change requirements that we've got to meet for wet research labs, whether they're 6, 8, 10, 4 air changes every hour. And that's because of the chemicals that are used in those labs or could potentially be exposed in those labs. We don't have that issue in computer labs. So yes, they're doing research. We're not bound to that 6 air change requirement anymore. And also we're allowed to recirculate air within the space and from one computer lab to the next, unlike you do in a wet research lab environment. Melody will talk a little bit about why that's important a little further on. And so our background for this project was, one of our background projects for this was the Florida Atlantic Engineering Computer Science building, which we did a little over 15 years ago. So data sciences wasn't a thing back then. So this was purely computer science, and it had a lot of the same types of spaces there. And so they wanted that building to be collaborative. They wanted to put engineering on display, which is why you see the picture here with the glass wall and mechanical room. But this building also had a large number of computer labs. It had some wet labs, and it was actually the first project in Florida, maybe in Florida entirely, but it was the first project that we delivered in Florida with chilled beams. And so this sort of set the benchmark in a couple of different ways. And so you can see some of the metrics here for that building in terms of energy and cost. The wet labs or the engineering shop type spaces bumped that cost up a little bit and also bumped the energy use up a little bit. And so this was one piece or comparable peer project that we used to do some benchmarking for the UF building. The other one is the Florida Poly Applied Research building. So we've done this building within the last 10 years, and it's also got some wet research labs in it, but they've also got a focus on computer science, engineering, some data science labs. And so that was, for us, it's a comparable project. And so the reason we're going to show you MEP, so building systems cost per square foot, and the reason that we've normalized it on building systems and not included architecture is because those costs vary widely between the Florida Atlantic building, the Florida Poly building, and the UF building that we're showing you here. And so we really try to normalize it on MEP to be able to have an apples to apples comparison. And so you can see the statistics for Florida Poly here again. Some of the wet labs, like you see in this photo on the right, they tend to drive up the building systems costs and the energy use because they're dealing with things like air change requirements and single pass air. But again, this is relevant to be able to begin to set benchmarks for the UF building. And so in terms of those benchmarks, we talked about cost per square foot and we talked about EUI, but we can also benchmark based on grossing factor. And so the reason that computer labs are more efficient in terms of space planning than what research labs are is you don't have to plan the spines and the chases to be able to carry that infrastructure, those pipe services, that one pass air up and down and throughout the floors. And so this is part of the understanding that we brought into this with the architects, the upfront programming and helping with blocking and stacking. And so to pivot a little bit, from the start, the project team as a whole was tasked by the board of trustees from UF to deliver an iconic building. So they wanted this building to stand out. You'll see that the building's all metal, these prefabricated metal curtain wall system. That's a departure from what they have around campus with brick facades. And so also the iconic vision was brought to the interior systems in the building, and we'll show you those a little further on. I already talked about the transparency and the collaboration that this building was tasked with. And so UF took the iconic theme all the way from the start of the project. So even to the selection for the design consultants. So UF historically goes through a competitive selection where they shortlist 3 firms, they bring them in, we interview, and then they negotiate from there. UF, for this project, actually gave a stipend for a half-day charrette for all of the shortlisted firms. Then each firm rotated through these different stakeholder groups in the university. So that was new for this project, and it just goes to show the reason that we bring it up here was how much of a departure this was for UF, and how it shows how serious they were about really delivering an iconic building. So beginning to drill down in some of the specific features of the building, we talked about the volume of work that UF had going on when this building was in progress. You can see here the site in this black dashed rectangle. So at the same time as this building was in construction, they had a big infrastructure project going on this east-west road here, and it was divided up into phases. So that affected not only how the construction manager accessed the site, but also how we planned our utilities. We also wanted to reserve space for a second phase of the building. So that meant that the first phase couldn't be plopped directly in the center of this site. And so that raised an issue with the existing utility structures that were down near the southwest of the site, and how we had to feed power and thermal utilities and wet services to the building. And the other thing that we had to contend with there is the pedestrian corridor that UF was in the process of planning when we were designing this project. So this pedestrian corridor was envisioned as a new pathway to get students from the Union up on the north side of this photo down to the engineering buildings, which are off the bottom edge of the photo. And that's parallel to an existing pedestrian corridor that's directly to the east of the site. You can see that road there. That's where all the engineering students cross between main campus and the Union down to the engineering buildings and the Health Science Center. The other thing I want to touch on real quick is the astronomy teaching observatory that's down to the southwest of the site. This is a small building on a much smaller scale than our building, but it drove some aspects of data sciences because being an observatory, the university was concerned about light spill out from our building, especially with all its transparency. They were concerned about light spill out from our building affecting the observatory and their ability to see the night sky. And so this is the observatory itself. I mentioned it being small scale, and university and the architects actually used AI to produce these renderings here on the right that you see to be able to give ourselves a level of comfort that the spill out wasn't going to affect the observatory. And a key part of that was the electrochromic glazing. And that really sealed the deal, that really sold electrochromic glazing, and we'll got some extra benefit out of that too as far as sustainability goes.
Thanks, Tyler. The astronomy observatory is a good segue into how our building interact and affect the surrounding and how our overall sustainability goal is. So at the beginning of the project, we were tasked to design a LEED Gold certified building as a minimum standard. We also have criteria in the selection program that we need to be 40% higher efficiency than the ASHRAE standard 90.1, which is in a building efficiency standard in the 2007 version, which roughly translate into about 30% more efficient than the ASHRAE 90.1 2010 version that our building is currently under. You can see every 3 years with the standard update, the baseline building also raised to the bottom in terms of efficiency, and the goal for sustainability become more and more progressive. We also want to design an infrastructure for future renewable energy, and our goal is to achieve about 10% of the overall annual electricity use. Later on, I will dive deeper into whether to choose a solar water heating system or rooftop solar panel system and how we come up with our decisions. With our HVAC system, there's also legacy rebate program that we want to take advantage of as part of our HVAC design. So with all those goals, we've held a regular sustainability charrette with the owner, designer, construction team to make sure that everybody has their goal aligned and have their compromises and discussions going on with different aspects of the building as they will affect each other. Here's a graph of one of the meeting and how we come up with the overall location and layout of the building. So at a get-go, we have a long list of suitable sustainability measure, which we call energy conservation measures. With the long list, we can do any kind of combination, and those are all proven success on our past project or as industry standard. We can categorize them into HVAC measure, envelope improvement, electrical measures, so on. All of them will interact with each other, as if you have less lighting intensity, you will overall reduce your HVAC load as well. So with that list, we highlighted a couple of options that we believe are suitable in terms of our budget, overall aesthetic, and constructability. Nowadays, we can use AI to give us the probable combination of those bundles if we set any parameter with a budget limitation or construction type, which comes really handy when we have a lot of options to choose from. So with the options we picked on the last slide, we did a programming level energy model where we basically made the building into a simple box and utilize each of those measures to see the rough percentage of reduction from our baseline building. We also use historical construction cost data and use our internal cost estimating to get a dollar per square foot with the first cost premium for those measures. Some of those measures has really good energy improvement, but higher first cost, and some measure has both attractive first cost as well as energy improvement. This helps us to decide how we can bundle those options together. So our next step is to give the owner an overview of a good, better, and best option. A good option is the one that is most similar to a baseline design where we have minimum improvement on lighting power density with utilizing LED lights and having demand control ventilation to achieve the rebate goal where I mentioned earlier. For the better case scenario, we used our dedicated outside air unit, the DOS system with a fixed plate, and we have active control beam as our design. In the best option, we have the water-cooled heat pump. One thing to highlight is our final design wraparound heat pipe of DOS was not in any of those three options. This is because we see it as a parallel option to the fixed plate DOS, where we just swap out the energy recovery component, and it has minimum impact of the design, and it has comparable costs and energy saving. So our next step is conducting an internal energy benchmarking for our building. First of all, we looked at the state university system data, where it looks at the median building energy consumption for all the Florida state universities. We can see newer campus here, such as Florida Poly, where it's a relatively new school with more component of dormitory building than wet lab research building. So the overall reported EUI is relatively low. But compared to UF, which is a school with a longer history and has a lot of research building component, the EUI is on the higher side with the average. So with that in mind, we also looked at several comparable AEI, and some of the case study that Tyler mentioned above was also in this database. So the next step, we looked at the AEI data with comparable building, where we get a better sense of project with similar skill, climate data, and function. And then we did our options together. and we get a range of 115 to 125 because our modeling result is slightly over 115. All of those in mind, it helps us to start a roadmap of where our building's energy consumption range will be and how can we tackle it to achieve our final goal. So this is a lesson learned in the past where we have the active chill beam system versus the variable air volume system. We have active chill beam system downstream from the DOAS system as the decoupling of ventilation and cooling. And traditionally, we will use a variable air volume box, which can turn down the airflow and help with the building overall consumption. So in the past, we learned that depends on your overall glazing percentage, glazing performance, your latent load, your ventilation requirement, your air change requirement. Chill beam can sometimes be less energy efficient compared to a traditional variable air volume system. Here is a graph that we further explain that phenomenon, where for a VAV system at full load condition, where it's the peak day of the summer, it consumes a lot more energy compared to a chill beam system. But as the weather become cooler in the half load or 1/3 load month around August, November, we will have a situation where having a variable air volume box is actually more energy efficient than a chill beam. So understand the local climate and designing a building accordingly became key to maximize your energy saving potential. So one of the approach we did was we also included fan power terminal units as an alternative to chill beams at certain rooms so that we can utilize the turn down of system as well as having the decoupling of cooling and ventilation. So this is our overall concept of a dedicated outside air system. It is not something we commonly use for data science building. It is something we use more often for a hospital building or a wet lab building because the amount of reheat we need for those space. But the intention for us to use for this facility is to draw bottom out of airflow, meaning that we want a really, really low airflow per square foot for this building as a benefit to decrease the floor-to-floor height requirement, to minimize the shaft and penthouse requirement for a more efficient net to gross ratio on the building square footage, and also to make the overall energy performance more efficient. The concept of this is to have a chill water coil and DX coil in series, where we have the leaving air temperature at 47 degree dew point, which means when you take in the humid outside Florida air, it really get cooled down and dehumidified to a point that you have dry air. And then we also have the wraparound heat pipe in series with those cooling coils so that we can utilize some free reheat and free preconditioning with our system. So this is a life cycle cost analysis where we have the actual baseline system with the traditional VAV terminal reheat as we've mentioned before. And we tried out a system with a wraparound heat pipe, with fixed plate heat exchangers, with dual energy recovery wheels. And among all those options, the dual cooling coil system with the wraparound heat pipe outperformed among all the other options with a really short, simple payback. We also had a standalone option 5 where we looked at early design data for a solar collector for heating hot water and domestic hot water. and get a rough estimate of the simple payback. So as a summary for the final sustainability measure, after looking at the options, we have the dedicated outside air system DOS with active chill beam and fan power terminal to balance the constant volume and variable volume application. We also have the chill water coil and DX coil in series with the wraparound heat pipe as our energy recovery system. Okay, so in addition to the HVAC system selection, we also did a glazing study with the trapezoid shaped metal panel building facade. We have 7 different glass types ranging from the solar heat gain coefficient from 0.13 to 0.28. Historically, those are all great glasses, but we need to place them in a way that we maximize the heating and cooling performance as well as meeting the building aesthetic. Earlier, we talked about we want to have an internal and external spine. So here is the layout with the floor to ceiling curtain wall going through middle of the building with glass type 3. And with all the color panel here, it represents either a solid metal panel or different glass with different window percentage. So to interpret that into energy and daylight performance, we did a simplified model where we translate the trapezoid window shape into a simple rectangular shape with equivalent square footage. And we also studied all the bump out of the building here and make sure that those cooling and heating load can be optimized with the internal and external shading. So with the collaboration between the MEP team and architecture team, we were able to determine the final building aesthetic and glazing placement. Tyler mentioned earlier with the observatory and utilization of the electrochromic glazing. So even with the window performance before, it has a solar heat gain coefficient of 0.22, which was a really good glass. But with utilizing the electrochromic glazing, it not only helped to reduce the glare at night, it also helped to reduce the cooling load during the peak sun of the day to 0.09, and it gives the user control options of tinting their window for privacy. So it became a win-win situation for us. So at the end of the glazing study, we reduced a lot of peak solar load per room. We also were able to reduce the overall building consumption. Note that the overall building consumption is a lot smaller compared to the peak load because the peak load could just be a couple hours in the afternoon in July. But the peak load is also significant because that's what we use to size all our heating and cooling system. So that helps us to reduce our overall system footprint and overall building mechanical room sizes as well. Doing this exercise helps us to get closer to our sustainability goal and working with our architecture team as an integrated team. So during the end of the design stage, we get into construction, and we did a site mock-up for the metal panel and the electrochromic glazing as well. This is not something we do often in North Florida or at University of Florida. Usually we'll do a masonry construction or curtain wall construction. So this prefabricated building facade is new for the construction team, and we want to make sure that we have the coordination, especially we have the electrical wiring component in the facade. Here's a picture of how the building facade looks at the factory where it's prefabricated, and how it's getting crammed in section for the building. So there's a lot of planning in the construction for sequencing on those panels, and to make sure things go smoothly and on schedule. So my next topic for sustainability is determining whether we will use the solar water heating system or the rooftop solar panel, because both systems will go on the roof and we only have so much available roof square footage that we can put those systems. So to achieve the 10% renewable energy goal, which one should we pick is a question that we were wondering during the design process. To tackle that question, we involved the Arctic Solar Collector. They're a manufacturer for solar water heater. They did a testing at a UF location for several days to get the actual electrical output for the solar collectors. They recommended us to use a more conservative measure to account for any kind of overcasting or weather factors as an average for the year performance. And we also use 8 hours per day as the heat collection average. So here's a graph of whether 12 or 24 collector compared to our overall heating hot water load for heating and cooling for the building versus our domestic water heating load. Our domestic water heating load is more stable versus our heating and cooling load could range between the summer and winter month. So to cover all of the building heating need, we would need 160 solar collector. But one problem with having the solar collector is that if we have that many collectors, we'll have a lot of wasted heat during the summer month. So we tested out at 12 and 24 to get an idea of how much saving we would have compared to a baseline steam system cost. This is also seeing what our solar generation for 12 collector is in comparison to our domestic water heating and heating hot water for HVAC. Our result is not very good in terms of simple payback, and there are two reasons. One is there's a high flat installation fee from the manufacturer to get all the systems set up. And in addition, the steam cost is really inexpensive from the campus steam plant. So with those two factors in consideration, we're not paying back with our 12 or 24 solar collector in a very reasonable range. So with that result, we went ahead and looked at our alternative of rooftop solar panels, where if we want to have a 10% overall renewable energy goal, we pretty much need to cover the whole lower roof and penthouse roof with solar panel. So we know the load, we went ahead and sized our inverter and have our wiring location planned on the roof so that we can have a solar ready building in the future without a lot of reconstruction. And in July 2020, which is the perfect time in the middle of construction, the building got additional funding that they were able to put in solar panel on the roof area where we planned without delaying the construction schedule and get us to the 10% of renewable energy goal and eventually pushed us to be a LEED Platinum certified building as well. Is that I'll give a quick overview of the overall MEP cost per square foot at $117 per gross square foot. It's comparable to our benchmark earlier, and the EUI is a lot better than our earlier benchmark, partially due to the renewable energy addition and partially due to optimization of the glazing study as well as the HVAC system. we achieved our 30% better goal than the actually 90.1 2010 version. So all of those translate into real dollar saving for energy cost as well. And we did a self-reporting under the I2SL Lab 2.0 pilot scorecard, where we score 100 for the perfect score for energy score, as well as 97 for the embedded carbon score.
So we're going to do some before and afters and talk about some of the interior systems, and then we'll wind it up and leave time for some Q&A here. So in terms of interiors, you know, Melody talked about how chill beams and fan power terminal units not only let us save some energy, but they also let us get the building systems out of the way of the iconic the collaborative spine in that image on the lower left, and the big auditorium that Melody mentioned, and the conference room on the 7th floor of the building in the upper right there. We really had good success working with the architecture team on this, and being able to deliver the look and the finishes that they wanted from the building system to keep HVAC especially out of the way. And so going on to some before and after photos, you know, this is the Florida Institute of Cybersecurity lab that I mentioned earlier. This is probably this was the closest space to a traditional wet lab that we have in this building. So they've got all kinds of imaging tools in this lab, and they're looking at chips to see if they've been altered or tampered with, and that's the cybersecurity aspect of this. So what you can see in the before image over there on the left is how, you know, they were operating in one of the older engineering buildings on campus in a space that wasn't all that great, but they were making it work. And so on the right, you can see, you know, where their new home, excuse me, in our building, and you can see the utilities that we planned for them there, both on the right side of the picture with that surface mounted raceway for power, and on the left side with the utilities fed down from the columns. So those are their pipe services. You can see the casework. You can see the daylighting coming in over from the left, and the fact that we planned these labs without any ceilings, which we could devote a whole half hour to talking about painting requirements and acoustics that were associated with that. But going on real quick, this is the maker space. So this building has a fair amount of maker space, and this shows you, again, some of that found space. So these different research groups were in a number of different buildings that were scattered around, you know, one end of UF's campus. And you can see, again, over here on the right, the space that their new home and the data sciences building. And so one of the things I'll call your attention to are these snorkels on the left side of this picture over in the back of the room. And so that's really to do source capture of exhaust coming off of the 3D printers. And so the reason that that's important to point out is because this room is also recirculated air. So anything that comes off, anything that's off gas from the 3D printers, we capture at the source, and we're able to be that much more energy efficient by recirculating air out of this lab. So the Digital Worlds Institute, again, you can see the picture of their old lab over on the left. And so they do a lot of studies with cameras and lighting and motion recording. And so that's what leads to these pipe racks that you see in both images. And we'll have another one later on. But, you know, the space on the right is part of their new research space. And this is really at the building entry. And so you can see that movable partition there. They can really show this space off to anybody coming into the building or at any kind of events that they're having in the building, and do some augmented reality type things there. This is another example of that same kind of space. You can see a better picture of the pipe grid system over on the right here. Again, we work really closely with the architects to plan this and make sure that lighting and HVAC was out of the way of it. And so this is another example of much nicer space that they have in the data sciences building than their old home. So one thing to touch on real quick is the collaborative space. A specific example is the cubbies or the booths that you see over on the right-hand side here. So an interesting fact about these is that Building Code Administration at UF actually required us to ventilate each one of these booths individually. So these aren't ventilated from the overall room. These have their own ventilation. So that's an interesting aspect to point out in terms of sustainability. One other thing we'd like to show you is the robotics lab. So you can see their old space on the left, what their new home on the right. So this gets at, putting these research programs on display and having this 2-level space where you can see the observation deck coming down from overhead. They can actually fly drones in this space. And the pipe grid that you see here is for different kind of partitions, so they can partition the volume of the space off, and you can see the lighting and the HVAC. We pulled out of the way there and got it up near the top of the room. And so in terms of putting this on display, they both did it from within the building. You can see the view from the observation deck, as we'll call it, over on the left here, and they did it on the exterior of the building. So this is a view from walking down that pedestrian corridor that's on the east of the building, and this is seeing into that robotics lab. So, I mean, this is prime real estate for really showing off that part of the program and letting the engineering students see what's going on inside of the building. And so, bringing it down the home stretch here, we've talked to you about how, the differences that a data sciences program brings compared to a traditional wet research environment. We've talked to you about some of the strategies that we use to deliver what's really an iconic building and to meet, those requirements for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and really go beyond that in terms of getting a LEED Platinum certification. We talked about how we leverage some of the data and some of the technology to deliver this project.